Those of you that know me know that I'm a fun-loving person. What?
You're a party dude.
I'm not a party dude, just a dude. Sunday, Curtis was getting ready to start his class. I told him, I said, "Come here, Curtis. I got something I got to say to you." And some of you already know about this. And he came over and I said, just as straight a face as I could have, I said, "Curtis, I can't teach you class Wednesday night." He got that look on his face, his eyebrows raised up, and you could just hear the gears churning in his mind about who in the world is he going to get on that quick a notice. And I kind of grinned and I said, "I'm just funning you." I said, "I'm practicing because our lesson is on discouragement." But I made up for it. I bought him his lunch. So I'm glad that you're here this evening. I don't know a person that has never experienced discouragement in some sort of way. This is in the whole sector of what we're looking at. We're in chapter 3 on the Barnabas Factor, and we're talking tonight about the problem of discouragement. And to some degree, all of us have been discouraged at least slightly, if not tremendously, from time to time. It may be in our jobs, it may be in our families, and just as the Morgan family is going through this right now with illness in the family, and sometimes tragedies strike people, and tornadoes come through, floods come, and people ask the question, why? And the only answer is it's because we're human. And we live in a place that falls apart. God did not build this earth to last for an eternity. He tells us that. He didn't build us to last for an eternity. He tells us that we have about 70 years, and if you get more than that, wow, it's because of the strength of your days. And some of us are living on borrowed time. We've already hit that 70 and we pushed past it, and it's kind of interesting to see the closer, the further along that we get, the more feeble that sometimes we get, either physically or mentally, either one. So we're going to talk about this tonight. I liked this statement that was made: God grant me the courage not to give up what I think is right, even though I think it is hopeless. It's sort of like being in school and you take a test, and you've been in the class and you've studied all of the lessons, you've read the pages, and you've prepared for the test, and you sit down and and the first one makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And you just feel like you're lost. And that's the way that discouragement is oftentimes. Even when we think that it's hopeless, if we're right, we need to push ahead. Now, this was stated by Admiral Chester Nimitz. How many of you know who Admiral Nimitz was? Good. Probably one of the best naval tacticians we ever had, and probably even still to this day. When we've got ships that get run into in the middle of the ocean with nothing around except another ship within 100 miles, it makes you wonder about what's going on with our Navy sometimes. And so in this, I think we have to remember that discouragement is something that we all experience. And whether it is a physical or a mental discouragement that happens to us, we have to understand that sometimes we think there is little or no hope whatsoever. When people feel like this, they kind of anticipate failure. And if you talk with most people today, they really don't expect to succeed in almost anything that they get involved with. You see, there are a couple of passages that I want you to have in mind as we go through this. One is in Deuteronomy 1:21. And this is the promise that God makes to the children of Israel as they're getting ready to go into the promised land. He says, "Look, The Lord your God has given the land to you. Go up and take possession as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has promised you, and do not fear or be dismayed. That's the kind of statement that would say, let's go. Give me a stick. I'll go out there and I'll take them all on. And yet, most of the time, we don't really believe that God is on our side. And I think the problem with that is that most of us have never really, ever had a really close connection to the Lord Himself. We say, well, God's out there, and as some people have said, well, we keep praying and we think God might be up there in the corner of the church building up there somewhere and listening to our prayers. But He's there, He's real, He listens, He guides, He directs, He intervenes. All of these things to encourage His children. Now, technically, every human being is a child of God because God created mankind to start with. But there is a special relationship that we have when we succumb to His Son Jesus, when we give ourselves to Him, when we understand who Jesus is and we believe that He is the Son of the living God. And we respond to that by imitating His death, His burial, and His resurrection by being baptized into Christ for the remission of sins. From that point on, this word discouragement ought to be something that's just kind of on the back burner. It doesn't mean that terrible things may not happen to us. They will, they can. But it does really tell us that we have an advantage over other people in this world. Paul in the book of Thessalonians said we shouldn't, when somebody dies in our association, we shouldn't despair like the people of the world that have no hope. We have an advantage that nobody else has. Now the Lord made this promise, but in only 7 more verses of this same chapter, here are the people and their response who say, whither shall we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our heart, saying, the people are greater and taller than we are, and the cities are great and walled up to heaven. And moreover, we have seen the sons of Anakims that are there. And I said unto you, do not dread and neither be afraid of them. You ever heard the old statement, bigger they come, the harder they fall? What if David had taken that same kind of attitude of these people right here and said, oh man, he's bigger than I thought he was? Have you ever wondered why David took 5 stones? Any of you ever used a slingshot? I know Norman has. If you use a slingshot, one thing is for sure. You're not very accurate with it most of the time. And I'm not talking about this kind that you can pull back and shoot with a rubber band. He didn't have rubber bands in those days. He had one that was made out of sinew and a little leather pouch, and he'd put that rock in that thing and he'd sling it around his head and turn it loose at the right time. And if you and I tried that and we were trying to hit the window back here, we'd probably hit over here. That's called missing the mark. Now, when all of this takes place, we have to realize that hopelessness happens. Hopelessness is when we lose sight of what we're really aiming for in life. Oftentimes, we cannot even be consoled. And the problem is sometimes we try to reach out to folks that are going through this experience, and we find that they do not sometimes even want to be consoled, and they just give up. And they fall back within themselves, and they quit life. They quit their family. They quit their job. They just quit because they can't see to the end of the problem. Now, part of this discouragement that comes along is all related to one thing, and that is a flawed focus. Now, I don't know what your focus in life is, but mine is to get to heaven. To show you how that works, in 2004, I had an almost fatal heart attack. And the first thing that the doctor said to me when he came into the room where I was, he didn't say, "How do you feel? Do you hurt anywhere?" He says, "Do you have your will made out?" You think that would discourage people? Not me. I told him, I said, "Well, okay." I said, "I have, yeah, it's made out." And I said, "If it's time for me to go, I'm ready to go." And then he had the unmitigated gall to go out and tell my family I wasn't going to live through the night. And I told him, as I called him Dr. Doom and Gloom for a while, I said, "I'm going to give you a good dose of enthusiasm and optimism before I get out of here." We became great friends. And I've outlived him. He's dead and gone. Hopelessness upsets the whole realm of what life is all about, and that's serving God, not serving ourselves, not amassing great riches or property or things, but the whole idea of serving God. I'm here, I'm His servant. Lord, use me. I'm here, however that you want to. When we lose that focus, then we can become discombobulated. I'm not sure that was the way to pronounce it, but that's close enough. The whole concept of why there is so much problems in the world today is because people have lost the focus of why we're on the face of the earth to start with, and that's to serve God. But we try to serve ourselves. Discouraged people often, and here's a passage that we're going to come back to. We're not going to read this right now. We're going to come back to that if time permits here. Because this is an important idea, a concept that we need to look at. But I just want you to have this in mind. If you want to turn to it, we'll come to it a little bit later on. Numbers 13, beginning with verse 16. This is the report the spies sent that were sent, the report of, and my computer didn't spell that right, of the spies that were sent into the land of Israel. This is what they came back and what they say. This is the attitude that many people, "I can't do this." How many times in raising your children did your children become frustrated? "I can't do this." And you said, "Well, come here, let me show you how." And we instructed them and showed them how, and they still couldn't do it. And then we showed them again, and then they showed them again, and showed them again, and finally they kind of caught on to it, and finally they said, "Well, I can do it." And then they wanted you to pat them on the back. Grown people are like that. A few years ago, I taught a class in singing at a place where I was preaching, and this was actually for the young men in the congregation. I had two older men said, "Oh, you can't teach us how to lead sing." And I said, "Yes, I can." I said, "You just simply do what I tell you to do." I don't know about one of them, but I keep reading in the bulletin of that, and this has been, 20? Well, we left there 13 years ago. And one of them is still leading singing today. He said he didn't know how to lead singing. He said, "I can't do this." Yes, you can. So many men in the church, so many women in the church who say, "I can't teach a class, I can't do this, and I can't do that." Why? It's because we've lost our focus. God is on our side. God is with us. God is going to help us. And we forget that. And we lose our focus, and this is what happens to us. In reality, I think people are prone to overemphasize their human imperfections and to overreact when they make a mistake. We think that we're the only ones that ever make a mistake, and we think that our mistake is worse than anybody else that made the same mistake. You know, there is nothing that is common to man that hasn't happened to all of us. And God says that it doesn't make any difference what your plight is in life. It's happened to other people. And no matter how difficult, no matter how terrible it may seem in life, it could get worse. And sometimes it really does. All right. Sometimes when people get to this place in life, they turn to alcohol to find relief from the loneliness and their pain of discouragement. We have a tremendous problem in our world today. All this does is fuel the fire. It does not make you feel better. It does not help you get through something. It is just another piece of firewood on the fire of discouragement that depresses you to the point where you just don't want to go on. The other major problem that happens is that oftentimes people turn to drugs to find relief from their loneliness and pain of discouragement. We have a tremendous epidemic in this world today. And I guess the American people probably take more drugs than any other nation in the world. More illegal drugs than any other place that I've read about. All take place here in America. You know, if we quit doing that, they'd quit bringing them in here because they couldn't sell them. And the only reason they bring them in here is because somebody's going to buy them. And people buy them because we're in such a lack of focus of what we're supposed to do and who we really are, is that we feel like that this is the only way out and the only way that we can get through this. The courageous person accepts who they are, and without being limited by their circumstances. Several years ago, when I faced retirement, I faced the same question most people. What are you going to do when you retire? I thought, I had all these great plans. One day a week I was going to read. One day I was going to fish. One day I was going to do this and that. And then I said I had the week all planned out of what I was going to do. Man, it don't work like that. Those of you, Ray, when you get ready to retire, it won't happen that way. You can have all the best plans in the world, but the problem is you're going to lose your focus. And so I decided I'd try a few things. And I tried painting. I could paint. That's on the back burner now. I bought me a hammered dulcimer. Sat down, could play it. It's on the back burner, covered up in dust right now. And there are several things that all of us have decided that we were wanting to do that when we retired. But life goes on. Life happens. Terrible things sometimes happen. Discouragement comes along. And if we don't have the focus of mind to remember that God is with us no matter what happens, we can be caught up in this terrible, terrible direction that the world is going in. And so we have to remember, I can do it, and then focus, I will do it. And if we don't do that, we're going to waste our life. We're going to waste our talent. In this room, if we were to add together all years of the experience that are here, I suspect from all the gray and bald heads that are here, that we would probably come up with about 1,000 years of experience. Because some are hitting close to 100 to start with, and you take about 10 of those, and it don't take too long to start adding this up, does it? But what are you doing with your experience? What are you doing with 50 years of experience of studying the Word of God, reading the Word of God, maybe even teaching the Word of God? Have you lost your focus? You see, not only does being personally discouraged happen, but your discouragement is contagious. And if the people of the congregation are discouraged, the congregation will be discouraged, and a congregation can become useless and ineffective where it sits. Well, you remember this little book that all of us have read, The Little Engine That Could? Now, most of us didn't read this particular one. We read one that was put out by the Disney Corporation. I couldn't find it, but I got this one. And what was the important thing about this little engine? He said, I think I can, 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 I think I can. And what happened when he hit the peak and got over the top of it? What did he say? I knew I could, I knew I could, I knew I could. That's all that it takes sometimes. And we need the training programs within the church in order to get rid of this discouragement, whether it's young people or old people. We have a pulpit minister, we have a youth minister. Why don't we have a geriatric minister? We've got more geriatrics than we've got youth people. And won't last long on them either. Some of them better hurry up. And so this is the attitude that gets rid of discouragement. This is what overcomes this problem in life. It's a focus. It's an attitude. And if we don't have the right attitude, we're going to fail. Now, what are some of the common causes of discouragement? First of all, misfortune. If you're driving down the road and you have a flat tire, that's a misfortune. You didn't do that on purpose. You didn't intend to do that unless you saw the nail and you deliberately ran over it, then you deserve to have a flat tire. And you get out there and you say, what am I going to do? I got a flat tire and I'm supposed to be at... What should be your attitude toward that? Get on your cell phone and call the guy and say, come change my tire. And you got a ARP or you got AAA or somebody like that, it'll do that for you. And then read a book while you're waiting for them to get there the next day. See, we can become discouraged over things that we don't need to be discouraged over. The world's going to go on. Things are going to happen. And when we talk about misfortunes in life, we turn to places like this in the book of Genesis. You remember the great story of Joseph. We told this as a kid. Sometimes we'd say, oh man, what a great guy Joseph really was. But listen to this. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him out of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him there. Now, that's kind of depressing to start with here. His brothers have sold him into slavery. Not only is he sold into slavery, he goes down to a land he doesn't know anything about. I bet he can't speak Egyptian when he gets there. But the Lord was with Joseph. And he became a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And the master saw that the Lord was with him. And the Lord had made all that he did prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over all of his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from that time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph's sake. And the blessing that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house, for the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not even know what he had except for the bread which he had to eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, come, lie with me. He refused. And he said to his master's wife, behold, my master doesn't even know what is with me in the house, and he has committed unto me everything that he has to my hand. And there is none greater in this house than I, and neither has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. And how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not listen to her, or to lie with her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by the garment, and she said, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled, and he got himself out of there. And it came to pass that when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled out of there, that she called the men of the house and spoke to them and said, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to mock us, and he came in to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass that when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got himself out. If you have never figured this out, sometimes the great grievement that you have and the discouragement that you have in life is because somebody has lied about you. And it doesn't make a difference in the world who you are. Somebody will lie about you to discourage you, to get at you, to get after you, to down you, to get rid of you. It happens. I know. And she laid up his garment beside her until his Lord came home. She spoke to him and told him these words, "A Hebrew servant which you brought unto us came in to me to mock me. And it came to pass as I lifted up my voice and cried that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife which she spoke to him, after this manner did the servant did to me, his wrath was kindled. And the Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in this prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Now you talk about getting lemons and making lemonade. There are stories that sometimes the story is not what is there for us, but what is seen as what happened. Joseph's a great fella. Terrible things happen to him. But how does he get through this? It's because the Lord is with him. He did not lose his focus. And he did not allow himself to become discouraged. And the whole idea is bloom where you're planted. And don't grow up a weed. You see, you cultivate the good stuff. If you just plant it and leave it, what's going to happen? It'll either die or the weeds will take it over. You have to cultivate your Christianity, your relationship with Christ, and your relationship with God. Okay. A second thing that we have to deal with that causes great discouragement are mistakes that we make in life. Nobody here has ever made a mistake. I know that. I can tell by looking at the friendly looks on your faces. You have never made a mistake in your life, and your grin gives you away. Doesn't take long to make mistakes. Sometimes we make promises and we can't keep them. It's a mistake that we need to realize in our lives, that there are things that we need to continue to do and to let other things go, so that when we've made our word, that we keep our word. Now, mistakes sometimes are intentional, and sometimes they're not intentional. Here's a good illustration. Judas. He was disloyal. His betrayal against Jesus, his guilt, his suicide. We've summed up his life in 4 words. We know the story. And we look at it and we say, why did Jesus choose him? He needed somebody to betray him, to get him in the situation so he could die on the cross. Have you ever thought about it like that? Or have you just always put Judas down? And he's still discouraged even in the grave to this day because of the way that people think about Judas. He had purpose in life. Jesus would not have chosen him if he would not have done this. That's kind of hard sometimes to think about. That sometimes, this is one of those things that we have to consider very carefully in life. Was death the only way out for Judas? Nah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I sort of disagree with you a little bit on that.
Again?
Jesus chose 12 men, and any of those 12 could have
betray him.
They could have, yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that Jesus chose Judas to be the one to betray him, but Jesus knew he knew how things would go.
Yeah.
But any of the others could also have betrayed him.
Yeah.
I don't think, and sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that God chooses us for a particular thing, and that may not necessarily be true. Jesus didn't choose him to betray him, but he chose him with the others as a potential that he could betray him.
Okay. And I disagree with you a little bit. I think in particular that all of us are chosen. And we're chosen for who we are and what we are and where we are. Joe?
This goes back to another thing that I've had to deal with a lot in life, and I think I've got it straight in my head. We act like God had one purpose for us. We talk about the plan.
Yeah.
And the plan is what I'm supposed to figure out. And I lay on my deathbed going, I never figured out what the plan was.
Mm-hmm.
And the plan was for you to just go do something good.
Okay.
You know, whatever that is. You know.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of my favorite books of the Bible is the book of Job. It answers more problems of life than any other book that's there. You go through this and you look at Job, and God says to Satan, he says, I want you to look at my servant. What a great guy he is. Satan says, he says, just upset his life a little bit and he'll turn away from you. God says, no, you can. He said, no, he won't. He said, you can do anything to him you want to except take his life. Kills all of his children. Takes away all of his income.
Should have killed his wife. I'm sorry.
No, she gets punished later on. I'll get to that in just a minute. Has 3 friends that come in and give him terrible advice. His wife nags him to curse God and die. Everybody would say, just go ahead and throw the dirt in on top of me. I'm ready to go. And Job says, I don't understand it, but I trust God. He never lost his focus. And in the result of everything that takes place to Job, and then on top of all of this, he comes down with boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his foot. Insult upon insult upon insult. Terrible. Terrible. And the Bible says to us that in the end, he was, 10 times better than what he had before? He had evidently more income, more animals, more servants, and more children. I think that's how his wife got punished for her position. So be careful, women, about nagging your husbands. So, and he was greater than he ever was before, but he still didn't have the answer. We don't know what our answer is. You don't know if what God wants you to do, you've already done it. I think of Moses when God said, I want you to get my people and take them out of Egypt. Moses said, I can't do that. He's this guy like, I can't do that. Why? I'm slow of speech. I can't make a good speech. And he starts giving all of these, and God said, giving you, brother, get down there and do it. And the expectation, what was Moses going to do? He's going to lead them into the promised land. How far does he get? On the other side of the river where he can look over and see it, and that's it. Why? Because he messed up one time. And he didn't focus on what God said. Now, I don't think death was the only way out. And part of the problem that we see today, why are there so many suicides, especially among our young people today? We haven't given them the focus of God and Christ and the church and serving humanity. They're wandering in the wilderness. And they need leaders, they need guides, they need good examples. And that's why God made parents, to teach and to guide their children and to get them where they need to be. You know what? They're going to stumble. You know how I know that? Because we did. We still do. And one of these days, they're going to be in the same place, and you're going to look back and see, Mom and Dad told me. And they're going to say, and they may not say it to you, but they're going to say, I wish I'd listened. And they're not going to say to you, to your face, you told me, you warned me, you instructed me. Peter denied Jesus. He was remorseful, but he never lost hope. Judas betrayed Jesus. He was remorseful, but he let his mistake overwhelm him. What happened with Peter? Eventually, as time moves on a little bit, we find him standing on the day of Pentecost and delivering one of the most powerful sermons that's recorded in the Scriptures. And 3,000 people were baptized. Wow. I've never seen that. I would love to see it. It just doesn't happen that way anymore, does it? Peter regretted his behavior. He refused to let it destroy him. He received God's forgiveness, and he went on to become a great servant in the kingdom of God. Now let's talk about unintentional discouragement. This happens when others do things to us. Sometimes they're insensitive to the way that we feel. If you don't believe that's true, how many times if you've ever gained some weight, somebody says, oh man, you've gained some weight. Boy, that's encouraging. Somebody said, well, you've lost a little weight. And I said, no, I grew taller. But insensitivity sometimes, intimidation, sometimes people do things to you to just tick you off and to make you lose your cool or to put you down, and they do this on purpose. And sometimes they just flat ignore you. And I think that's the one that hurts lots of people. I've got a great idea. So what? It's like the little kid in the back of the room. The teacher asks a question and his hand goes up first time, every time. His hand goes up. I know. And sometimes you know and sometimes you don't know. Sometimes your answer is right and sometimes your answer is wrong. But we have these things that happen to us. Let's talk about insensitivity. We're running out of time. Sometimes we get criticism. Sometimes you don't even have to look for it. Somebody just kind of jumps on you or slaps you down with it. Sometimes criticism can be helpful advice or it can be hurtful judgment. And we have to decide on which it is. And sometimes you just have to ignore the criticism that comes your way. It's sort of like preaching. You can preach a sermon, you stand at the back door and shake the congregation out. There'll be some come out and say, that was a great sermon, preacher, and others will say, I've heard that one before. I had a lady tell me one time, said, only time that she ever made a comment about me having a good sermon was when I preached on baptism. And she'd say, well, you finally had a good sermon, preacher. You'd have to know her and the family to understand that, really. It was really something. We have to be able to accept helpful advice that builds us up and to know the difference, and it's hard to do. Sometimes people unjustly criticize us thinking it really helps us. And they may have good intentions, but they just don't know how to say what they're trying to say. Let's talk about Nehemiah for just a minute. He was mocked, he was derided, he was criticized, he was challenged, he was falsely accused, but he had focus. He had God on his side. And I want to share with you this passage from Nehemiah, the 4th chapter. It came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we built the wall, he was wroth, and he took indignation, and he mocked the Jews. And he spoke before, excuse me. He spoke, didn't get that frog out yet. He spoke before his brethren in the army of Samaria, and he said, what do these feeble Jews? What, will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? And Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, even that which they build up, if a fox goes on it, it'll break down their stone wall. You've never had anybody criticize what you did you? You built something, and they said, yeah, look at that. Listen, O our God, he prays, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey to the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together until the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. And it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Amorites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up, that the breaches had begun to be stopped, that they were very angry, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. But we made our prayer unto God, and we set a watch against them by day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversary says, they do not know, they don't see, till we come in the midst of them, and we'll kill them and cause the work to stop. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came and said unto us 10 times, from all places whence you shall return unto us, they are going to be upon you. So I sat in the lower places behind the wall, and upon the high places I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked, and I rose up, and I said to the nobles, to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. And it came to pass that when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to nothing, that we all returned back to the wall, everyone to his own work. They did not lose focus. They accomplished a task that their enemies, their neighbors, said, you can't do that, or we're going to stop you from doing that. And then there's intimidation. That includes browbeating. People put you down, say bad things about you, tell you that you're no good, you're worthless, so you can't do it. There's bullying that takes place. Sometimes it becomes very physical. There are threats that are made. If you do this, I'm going to do such and such. Harassment, so that you can't get your job done. Domination and control. They want to guide you to make you do what they want done. There's some bad people out there. And occasionally they slip into the church and they cause problems. I know. I've never served as an elder, but I've served as a preacher, and I guarantee you, I've had a lot of bullets fly past my ears. Then there's the problem of ignoring you. Have you ever had the silent treatment? Somebody just wouldn't talk to you. You're persona non grata. You're just a person without any kind of recognition. Sometimes there's a lack of appreciation. You do something good for somebody and, okay, thank you. They don't really mean it. It's sort of like the two kids that are fighting over a truck, and one's banging the other on the head, and they're fighting over this truck, and Mama says, now y'all quit that, and hug each other, and shake hands, and kiss each other, and say that you're sorry. And the kids say, no, I'm sorry. Do they mean it? Absolutely not. And there are people, grown people like that. Sometimes you're just overlooked. You're an insignificant person in their life, and that will put you down and make you discouraged. Sometimes not being counted on. When you have a talent, sometimes you have a talent and nobody asks you to use that talent. I used to like to play softball, but I was never a home run hitter. I could bat right-handed, I could bat left-handed. And most of the time I could get at least on one base and sometimes two. They could count on me for a hit, but that was it. Don't ask me to knock a home run, I can't hit one that far. But part of that problem sometimes was being picked last every time. How does it make you feel? Choose me, choose me, choose me. And sometimes just not being listened to. And that's terrible. We all have something to say. And we all have something to say that's important because we're saying it. And we're a child of God. And that's what makes us important. And that's what should keep us from being discouraged. You overcome discouragement through faith, through prayer, through fellowship, through study and preparation, and just do it. Somebody asked me one time, he said, well, how do we decide on the qualifications of elders? And I said, you know what the greatest qualification of an elder is? What? They're doing the work of an elder without being appointed. That's the way you pick elders. You don't pick them because they make more money than anybody else. You don't pick them because they're taller than anybody else. You don't pick them because they can yell louder than anybody else. You pick them because they're good men. They're doing the job of shepherding and helping and encouraging and teaching. Well, we don't get into this part of it here. But I would like to close by going back and reading this passage from the book of Numbers. And then the lesson will be yours. These are the names of the men which Moses sent out to spy the land. And Moses called Hosea the son of Nun, Joshua. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. He said to them, you get up and go this way southward and go up to the mountain and see the land of what it is and the people that dwell in, or whether they be strong or weak or few or many. And what the land is that they dwell in, whether it's good or bad, and what cities they have that they dwell in, whether it's in tents or in strongholds. And see what the land is, whether it's fat or lean, and whether there's wood therein or not. And you be of good courage and bring the fruit of the land. And the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So the 12 went up, and they searched the land from the wilderness of Sin to Rehob, as men came to Hamath. And they ascended to the south, and they came to Hebron, where Ahiman and Sheshai and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan was in Egypt. And they came into the brook of Eshcol, and they cut down from there a branch with one cluster of grapes, and it took 2 men to carry it upon a staff. And they brought the pomegranates and the figs. The place was called the brook Eshcol, and because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from there, and they returned from searching the land after 40 days. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel to the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, we went to this land where you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. But the people are strong that dwell in the land. The cities are walled and are very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there, giants. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and in the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let's go up at once and possess it, for we're well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, we're not able. to go up against the people because they're stronger than we are. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in are men of great stature. And there we saw giants and the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said, Oh, would to God that we had died in the land of Egypt, our God, would God that we had died in this wilderness. How easy it is to discourage people when they lose their focus. Thank you.